So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out what the future is for smart buildings. In case you're wondering who we are, a list of our profiles or link to LinkedIn profiles is on mondaylive.org. Just to point out that views expressed here on this hour are personal, not of any company or organization. And let us make this as interactive as possible with comments and questions on the Zoom chat tool. And also a reminder that this deck is available on mondaylive.org as well. So over the course of July, we are talking about disrupting buildings in the pursuit of smarter buildings. So we'll talk about that some more today. Specific agenda, we'll have our normal news and chit chat. And then we really want to focus today's conversation on why cloud native buildings. Cloud native buildings is what we set out last week to be the sort of the vision, the 2030 vision of what buildings look like. And we're going to be sort of digging into why is that the case for the different stakeholders involved. Just as a reminder again here, we're talking about disruption. We will be dark over the course of August. We decided to take a vacation and we'll return back on September 11th. Just keep that in mind. So I'm hand it over to Ken. What's going on over there, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. We got our article published, the Review, Renew, Retread of Real Relationships. I think there's a good message there. We all are working, we're all really busy. And I think it's a good idea to do kind of an inventory of all of your relationships, the folks that have kind of got you where you are, and just see what their thinking is, because everybody is in transition, everybody is changing. So I think it's a good message. Also out of that, we have a new old contributing editor, which is Paul Ehrlich, and Paul's come back to us, and he's working with the DOE and to get this new specification tool out. So take a look at that, and we're hoping to get some more of his wisdom into our magazine. Talking about that, a couple of LinkedIn posts that caught my attention were from our contributing editor, Keith Gibson. And he's been writing a lot. There's a lot of confusion in the industry about whether or not expert systems or rule-based engines is the real AI. He does a good post there. I think it's got some good information in it. He also did one, AI will be a boom for a very few and a bust for most. I think that's quite true. And I think that maybe goes back to the Review, Renew, Retread, relationships, is we need to take a look at the folks that have a lot of skin in our industry, and let's see what they're actually doing and how they're approaching some of these problems. And building even on that is automated building supports weird. And Glenn over at Harbor Research says, Internet of Things, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. And if you click through on that post, there's some interesting information that he provides on his site about that, and just some of the changes and how we have to kind of change our thinking. So that kind of caught my attention as well. So lots going on. Oh, the other one is Cochrane has posted a summary of their Realcomm, and there's some really good information on there. If you follow through, it takes you right through to their site, and there's actual video of some of the presentations. So good information for the industry. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. So that Keith Gibson piece on LinkedIn, I saw that. And I saw the beginning of the title. There's a lot of confusion out in the industry, and I thought he could have just stopped there and left the rest.
Yeah.
So interesting. He always has an interesting perspective. So thanks. Rick, what's going on with the coalition?
Well, I think the highlight has been that the young professionals group, and you just mentioned Keith Gibson, he did a series and it'll be available on video. And then the next event will be later this month, trying to nail down exactly what the date is for that. And it'll be about going to be talking about succession, borrowing from a popular TV binging that people are doing. It's like how's the next generation take over? How do they get their boss's job? And Mike Conway, I think, will be the guest of that, and Monica will have details on the exact dates for that coming up soon. But I also wanted to highlight we'll talk more about this, I think, during the session of what Glenn wrote with the Harbor Research, and we're going to try and highlight what he's describing as the sort of future technology, maybe for the next session of the young professionals. But stay tuned.
And by the way, I've just changed that. It's July 25th, not August 25th, the next webinar.
So Rick, I was thinking about how do young people take over for their bosses or whatever, or how do they purchase from? I've been saying to young people for years, if you're going to continue to do things the way your old boss did, you're going to go out of business. So that could be maybe weave that in.
Yeah, but also if you totally ignore all of the experience and wisdom there, you're not going to get very far either. So somewhere in between.
It's a balance.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Community board as normal. It's normal links there. Any other thoughts before we move on?
No, they just confirmed in the press this week. I think I told you about 3 or 4 weeks ago about HSBC had this iconic building in the middle of an area called Canary Wharf. They've been there for a long time, and they are now going to vacate that building and just go for smaller buildings spread around, because they don't need the space anymore because they're working from home. I don't know whether that will set a pattern or not, but that was the prime building in Canary Wharf. But certainly they're not utilizing the building the way they used to. With working from home, it's just not required anymore. So I think, that could be a pattern as people's leases come to an end over the next year, 18 months.
Does that put a question mark on the whole sort of Canary Wharf and East London development, all of that?
Yeah, what they're going to do about it, I don't know. But there's obviously a lot of major buildings on that site that were put up as an alternative to the city. There's still a lot of occupancy there, but with those guys leaving, I think there's every chance it could set a pattern. Don't know yet.
Roger, I was reading something. I don't know if it was The Economist or like New York Times or something, where the theme of the article was the work from home thing has been answered. There's no longer a question. Employers are having them come back to work.
Yeah, that's right, but only for 3 days. So
But now they're at depending. It's still a bit of a mix.
Yeah.
The zeitgeist is starting to be, no, we're getting back to the way we used to do
yeah,
it.
no, pretty much. I think it's set in its ways now that it's going to be hybrid. People are wanting to come back, and people want to come back to mix, but I think pretty much they're settling on a hybrid solution. So, 2 or 3 days in the office. So they want them back in. They don't want them full time away from the office, but certainly the hybrid solution looks like the way they're going.
A term that I keep hearing now with respect to hybrid is that structured hybrid, which is, to your point, Roger, usually 3 days a week. And they're now calling it structured hybrid. And another point, just when you're talking about younger people or whatever, I'm delighted to say, making a little announcement or whatever, is that myself and a couple folks from Tritium are going over to meet with students from ECPI, which is a technical trade organization, school or whatnot, to present opportunities within our industry. I'm actually very excited about it. they have embraced the notion of getting their students much more involved in our industry. So I'll report how that goes when it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But again, I think that's the type of stuff that I think we as an industry need to be doing more of. Get in front of these places where these younger next generation folks are studying technology and whatever. So anyway, there you go.
And the article I read on the return to office and how many days, apparently we're going to go to a 4-day working week because the 5th day is going to be done by AI. So AI is going to go for our 5th day.
And that'll be the day when the office closes on Friday,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it'll just be the robots.
Unless that's the day when the office is open for partying or some other thing. But anyway, let us move on, shall we? Right, so we're talking about disrupting buildings. In case this picture doesn't resonate with you, this is the whole Ford quote of way back, saying if he'd only asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, and obviously he was making cars. So that's kind of the hint there.
But what does
sorry.
that license plate say? Gmail on it?
It says US mail.
Ah, okay.
But I gotta just to interrupt you a moment, Anto, because I did a lot of research on this statement and what was going on. So 2 things jumped out that was interesting in my research on his, ask the market horse, ask the market and they'll tell you don't need a faster horse. 2 things that jumped out. One was you were, and this leads into what you're going to say, you're always going to be disrupting somebody, right? And in this particular case, of course, he was disrupting the horse industry, as you could imagine. So you can imagine that the most vocal people against his car initiative was the horse industry, right? And everything to do with horses. And in fact, at one point during this process, the US government had actually put a package together to pay people to work out how to make horses faster, breed, genetics, food, whatever. And so, not only were they actively campaigning against him, but they were also trying to research how to make their existing technology be what they wanted to be. So anyway,
Good use of government money.
there you go.
Okay, so last week we talked about this vision. The thought was that you actually need a vision to think about disruption. What is it other than a horse? And this is the answer that we came up with last week when we discussed it. And the makeup of that is obviously an architecture around that of all of the different. Sorry, I'm having problems again with my. With all the different clouds, public clouds and the private cloud and the on-prem systems in the building. And that's the whole rationale for the IBB. That's kind of explain all of that. And this is kind of the way of thinking about what that means, because the concept of cloud native something isn't really new, because we have a cloud native device in our pockets, all of us probably, most likely. That actually behaves in a very similar manner. So that was kind of the conversation last week. And the question really is why? And we kind of want to tackle this from a perspective of the supply and demand kind of framing that we did the Smarter Summit back in February. To think about it in terms of why does this matter for the building owners and people on that side of the equation, our collective clients. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. But we really want to spend the bulk of our time understanding why this cloud native buildings and this kind of vision of the future, why is it important for the industry? And more specifically, what is it going to do to the industry in terms of the players and the current players in terms of what they're going to do in the future in this kind of vision. So that was kind of the structure of that. And I'm going to bring on David Wiltz, who's going to help us in this sort of why conversation. David was a a guest on Monday Live a few weeks back talking about the sort of the dynamics of the financial ownership of not just necessarily ownership, but the financial impact of buildings, commercial real estate. I was speaking to David a couple of weeks ago and was talking about the cloud native buildings, and the first word that came out of his mouth was why. Right, so I'm going to hand it over to you, David. If you can sort of spend maybe 5 minutes telling us why there's obviously a movement going on here. Why is it important for buildings from an ownership and financial asset perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Anto. In the work I've been doing recently, I've really come to understand the focus that I think the majority of us on the call have had, and that's around the physical asset itself, the building, the systems in the building, the design and construction of the building, the operations of the building, and how all of that works together, and how having a smarter digital building helps all the tenants of the building, but also the operations of the building, and improving the tenant experience. And I know most everyone on this call has had to defend why you're making a smarter building. Why should it be digital? What's the benefit of it? And inevitably, the questions always come up of who's done this before, what are examples, and all of this, is unfortunately all too common still, and the benefits aren't self-evident to a lot of people. And when you look on the physical asset side of things, the property managers and facility managers are definitely coming around to seeing the value in this. However, when you look at the asset holders, the general partners and limited partners who actually own the larger commercial assets that they probably don't occupy, with those asset managers and investors, they don't really care about the physical asset itself. It's a capital investment. They're concerned about their return on capital. They're concerned about the net operating income, and they're thinking about what their hold time is going to be. And, based upon the beginning of this call, the office Armageddon that's happening, the massive devaluation that's happening in the top markets, and, how are they going to refinance these assets, or how are they going to unload them? Are they going to hand the keys back to the bank? What's going to happen? And if you think about, is the lighting control system integrated with the shade control system? It's not even on the radar. And when you also look at, so that's the first big statement, is the asset holders typically are not intimately involved, nor unfortunately care deeply about the physical asset itself. The second thing that should be noted is that with these asset holders, there are three key life events in the building they care about: leasing tenants and keeping the building with the highest occupancy possible. The second is financing and refinancing. So whether it's equity partners, or more importantly, lenders like banks and commercial banks, who give them the leverage they want to make more, do more with their capital. And then the third is disposition and acquisition, selling the property and buying the property. When you look at all of the documentation that's pulled together for each one of those life cycle phase events, whether it's leasing, whether it's financing or refinancing or disposition and acquisition, there's only one document that has to do with the physical asset out of all of them. And it's basically an engineering report on the building. And it's looking for warranties on the roof and other systems like that. And are there any gotchas? And when you're going through disposition and acquisition, What's presented to the marketplace is what's called an offering memorandum, or OM. And the OM is just like a listing for a house. It's the greatest house ever. And then you have to negotiate your price and buy it based upon just that offering memorandum and any other research you may be able to do. But then once you're under contract and due diligence begins, then you start digging into all of this documentation and see what's there and what isn't there, and find out, oh shit, the warranty for the roof is over in whatever 14 months, and it's going to cost $900,000 to do it, or whatever the challenge is. And so these asset holders have very, very high concerns right now about, of course, the state of the market, the state of their capital, the return on their capital, and how they're being responsible to their stakeholders, investors, or constituents. And I'm setting the stage with this information because if any of us went to these like an asset manager at JP Morgan Chase, why should they do this? And it, you know, from working in both of these worlds, it really comes down to de-risking things for both the buyer and the seller. It comes down to uncovering even more value out of the asset and greatly increasing the efficiency of these life cycle events when they happen and the overall operation of the building. And I don't know, Anto, should we bring up the document with the why section, or make
No,
people
let's-
aware of that?
Let's not go there.
Okay.
It's a lot of words
But-
in that reading, but that's
Yeah,
so the cloud, the concept of cloud native in itself doesn't do anything to the asset holders, other than the fact that it can potentially have the information necessary for these three major events. Is really what you're saying.
Absolutely that, but then also to go back earlier on the call about the forthcoming vacancy in Canary Wharf, and in London and in New York, there are historically high vacancy rates and very, very high optimization rates. So you could have a vacancy rate in the building if it's basically anything less than 80% occupancy. Most commercial buildings are losing money. And when you look at what buildings people want to lease and move into, as well as what building assets people want to invest in, now more than ever, energy efficiency, indoor air quality, meeting sustainability standards and guidelines, and having good reporting for the forthcoming SEC disclosure requirements, those are what are top of list. And really, those properties that have this in hand really are not only maintaining value, but maintaining an outsized value compared to buildings that do not have it. So when you put all of this together, it really speaks highly for leveraging the cloud, having cloud native storage, cloud native operations, and paying very close attention to documentation and building asset data. And this is only possible with a cloud-based approach, in my,
in humble opinion. Okay, I'd like to ping Rick because Rick's been saying similar things, but from a slightly different perspective. Would you like to sort of share your thoughts about how you're seeing those sort of similar dynamics playing out?
Yeah, that last part that when we talked about what who's moving, where are people moving in? What are the new expectations? What are the buildings that are going to be competitive and that are going to have good lease, and where people are going to come back to? The expectations about the digital experience have just changed overnight. And part of that is, we were talking about cars earlier, and I can't help but think about the fact that now if you're going to buy a car, if you're going to decide to make a car decision, you want the Carfax, and then you also want the live view of your connected devices to be able to see whether I've got error codes. I have no error codes on my old 20-year-old car right now, and I can check it in real time. And that's the sort of digital experience that people just have. So a combination of the cell phone, a combination of the appification of everything, it's just become the new expectation. Yes, there's a lot of people that are going to be laggards and that are going to be the last to adopt new technology. But you guys are getting used to me by now. It's like there's enough people that do have that expectation, that do understand the value of digitization, and they have that expectation, that we need to be giving them, what they're looking for. And specifically on cloud native. Cloud native is not a term that we made up or that any of us made up. Cloud native is something that is, as we talked about before, it's the Linux Foundation word for the new kind of technology architecture that is impacting all sorts of domains, not just buildings. But and it has to do with, comes from the Linux Foundation, so you can understand it's open source based, interoperability based. And what we're saying is that people, as you start to have digital expectations of your facilities where you're either going to lease new space or you're going to move into new space or you're going to come back to work, there is an option for interoperable and open systems based technology platforms. It don't have to go to a proprietary walled garden technology approach just to accomplish getting that digital experience. And so what we're promoting by saying cloud native is not just digital experience, but it's an open and interoperable digital experience. And that is huge for us to be advocating and setting direction for. And the response from the REITs and the campuses and the universities and school districts has been great, because they don't want a digital experience that is a proprietary digital experience. I held up my iPhone, didn't I? It's so painful. But unless you're Steve Jobs, don't try and run the table on being a closed architecture. The interoperable option is a better option. And there's enough people asking for it. There's enough people that know it when they see it, whether it's developers or owners on the supply and demand side. It's like, it's there. If we build it, they will come. It comes to mind. I'll stop.
Okay.
So presumably this is putting pressure on the REITs who seem to be responding. They're getting smarter, knowing that if people are moving out and looking for other buildings, they know that they're going to be demanding, the sorts of things you're talking about, right? Is that fair?
Absolutely. And that's where some of the REITs that we're working with, that I get a chance to feel fortunate to be talking with them, is they know that they have to be competitive. They know that they have to take advantage of every trick in the book, because if they don't, their competitor will. And so that digital experience of being able to, use the phone to experience the space around you. Now, it's also expanded to cities. And so, y'all know I spend a lot of time with city leadership and policymakers, and city leaders are not just sitting back and saying, oh, woe is us, tax revenues down or whatever. They're going digital to the extreme to go smart cities, digital enhanced city services, city experiences, because they know that building owners or tenants, they have a choice of which city to live in, not just which building to go to. And so they're doubling down, the policymakers are doubling down on digital experience for the residents and for the people that experience the city. So there's enough people looking for leadership and looking for products in this space. There's enough of them that understand the value of digital experience that we should stop questioning why they're asking for it my opinion, stop questioning why they're asking for it and start delivering what they're asking for.
I guess that's because a little bit like Tracy was saying earlier, everybody's busy, everybody thinks it's fine, but it's kind of, we're in transition at this moment. It's, people wouldn't recognize it unless they knew about it. So it's going to be a period of time before you actually see the adoption of this wholesale, because people can get on with what they're doing traditionally at the moment. But it's going to be over what sort of period are we going to get the deployment of a cloud native type solutions?
Well, we set the vision. This is last week. I don't think you were on last
Yeah, I
week.
wasn't on last week, sorry.
We set that to be a 2030 vision, right? So it's that kind of time frame. It's
Okay.
10 years-ish, right? It's kind of the way we positioned it. Where we have-
I think an important part of this and the why, and why I'm sitting here and listening to everyone talk and thinking about why is the why important, right? And part of why it's important is that it determines urgency, right? And the level of urgency that we have, and the importance of the outcome, the desired outcome to the prospective stakeholder, whether that be the building owner or other stakeholders in our industry, like system integrators or manufacturers or energy architects and engineers and things like that. So I think the why, to me, as I've been harping here lately, is maybe the most important part of this whole thing. And immediately, and I know in subsequent weeks we're going to talk about the how a little bit, but the fact that owners are aware and asking for this, and what their why is, has been articulated here a little bit, I think is really an important part of it. And then the rest of the industry that services those owners, it becomes really, their why becomes really easy, right? Because the owners are asking for it and they want it. And there's overwhelming evidence now that they want it. It's important to them for a couple of different reasons. Ultimately, this will boil down to a financial gain or benefit, whether it be through operational savings or improved equity value or retention or whatever it might be, but they all eventually convert to a financial reason. And I think that's consistent with what both Rick and David were saying here. And that's the important part to remember on this whole thing.
Right. So that sets up nicely why this vision makes sense from the owner's perspective. So the question then for this group, for the balance of this call, is that how is the industry going to be, how is it going to change because of this? What needs to change? How is it going to change? I'm not quite sure how to sort of ask the question, because it ain't going to stay still. Right? If the industry that we see today is the industry in 2030, the users that David and Rick sort of presented, or the owners, are not going to get what they need. They're not going to get it from this industry, so they may look elsewhere. But what do we need to do as an industry to be prepared for this?
I would love to take that one. I really see that data and information is going to become much more central to everything we do, and to the operation of a building and the financial management of a building. As technology improves, the velocity of the data will grow and speed up. The veracity of the data will increase, and the detail and granularity of it will increase. And to give some examples, at ULI in Dallas in the fall, at the closing session, one of the co-leaders of Blackstone says they have no idea about the cash flow in their buildings. They maybe get reporting once a month, but it's typically by quarter, and it's not standardized in any way from their different providers. And so they're struggling just to understand the financial health of the building, let alone anything about the physical health of the building and the systems in it. And I don't think we should in any way underestimate how behind the financial managers in the industry are. I talk to them all the time. And when I ask, what's your tool stack and what do you use? It is inevitably, Argus is used for valuation. It's the software created by Altus out of Canada originally. And then they use Excel and shared drives. And that's it. They may use, in many cases, they'll use Yardi for a kind of P&L, but that's where they're getting their lease data for the most part. And they don't have any tools that bring all of this together. And they, no one, I mean, the people I've spoken to, no one really likes Argus. It's now over a decade old. It's not SaaS based, or they're transitioning to it. So in a great quote from Machiavelli is, one of my favorites is, assume incompetence before conspiracy. And I think this is a situation where the asset holders don't know what to ask for, don't know how to solve this problem. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this all changes. But to summarize, I see the industry moving to a digital workflow, a digital development workflow, where data is much more central to everything, and the information that is required from the design team, from the construction team, from the operations team, and from the asset systems themselves, all of that data will increase in velocity, veracity, and granularity. And you've got to be cloud native to make this happen. And this is the direction we're seeing asset holders like, Microsoft or Google, as some examples. They own their own buildings. They're digging into this, as a lot of us, a lot of the people on the call know or are working on. I see this evolving to being more of a standard thing for asset holders who, don't occupy the building as well. And now I'm going to read these other comments.
One of the thoughts that came to me at the AHR, the recent AHR event in Atlanta, was that in many ways, we're not in the control and automation of buildings industry. We're actually in the information about buildings industry, right? We're not, I mean, I know there are products that some of us sell that are about control and automation, but the bigger value proposition that we're talking about is really the information about what's going on in the building. And that stretches out obviously into what David was talking about.
He made me think of something I hadn't really thought about as a beneficial outcome to this. If you look across other industries that have been disrupted, lots of times the reason they were disrupted had something to do with efficiency and speed of information, speed of decision making, speed of a car over a horse, that kind of a thing, And if we can truly provide more instantaneous information to building owners on cash flows, values, evaluations, efficiencies, whatever it might be, that in by itself is a pretty strong value proposition in terms of what we do, and having that the data open, interoperable, available, is one of those kind of critical things that we've identified way a long time ago, right? So that's kind of interesting. And I do want to address Gregory's comment in there, or I think we should talk about that too. That's That to me is the biggest resistance to this whole effort, is what he talks about. That, which is the siloed system produces the profits for a lot of the value chain here associated with buildings, right?
So I was going to comment on Greg's comment about silos. I've for years, being in the integration business, thought that silos are bad. We don't want silos. We actually want a single thing that everybody so all the data can flow. I actually don't think that anymore. I actually think silos are necessary because silos are also the basis for disciplines, right? We don't want the fire industry silo to behave like they're the, I don't know, plumbing industry silo or whatever, right? We want them to do their job really well as that silo. So I think that applies to pretty much all silos, but we want all of the information about those silos to be able to move across between silos and be used by the building owners.
One of the questions that I have, and this goes to Tracy's point, and about disruption, is disruptions usually take a factor of 10 or an order of magnitude to be very effective in what they do. And I struggle with finding factors of 2 in what we do. Can somebody point out to me where we get factors of 10?
Not by not looking at the value proposition that we've in the past been delivering.
Right.
I think that's the answer, because if you think about the cell phone, the smartphone, and you compare that to AT&T phone of 30 years ago, right? When the phone was originally, actually cell phones, when that was originally introduced, it didn't make you be able to speak 10 times better or 100 times better than the AT&T dial tone, right? But it gave you all of these other things of texting and eventually booking your holidays and
Mobility.
right, and a whole bunch of, so in other words, the value is not comparable. You can't just take the value of the status quo and say it has to be 10 times greater than that. It's actually got to be 10 times greater in some other dimension.
Yeah, you might even say that mobility was more than 10 times.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it
So
was
that-
non-existent, right? Prior.
Right.
Yeah.
But I still ask the question, because if you need a factor of 10 and we need to produce a factor of 10 to get that disruption, even if we're not looking in taillights, even if we're looking forward, where is it coming from?
One thing that kind of strikes me a little bit here, that forever we've always been in push mode, right? It sounds like there's a little bit of pull here now from, you know, the REITs and others, which may help accelerate some of this stuff. I mean, we're not going to create the new technology ourselves. That's something we're going to adopt to provide solutions. But just if the you know the owners and the occupiers and the REITs and everybody else are starting to pull, and there's some things like ESG and other just moving factors, that would be a significant change in our industry, because never have I ever seen that before. It's always been the industry pushing.
I would take that one step further, and I'll give you a real example from something that happened to me just over the weekend here yesterday. I was on LoopNet. For those who don't know what that is, that's a commercial property equivalent of like Zillow or Realtor.com, right? And looking at values of various properties that are up for lease and or sale that compare to our building that we own and that we're in. And there was one that stood out to me for 2 reasons. One, it had a higher dollar per square foot valuation. It was a building for sale, about the same size as ours and the others in the cohort. But in the top 2 or 3 bullet points, it said it's a, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, smart building, able to control lighting, HVAC with a smartphone, right? As one of the lead bullet points in selling factors. Now, there are some other things that made this building a little bit nicer. It was a little bit newer than some of the others, but the difference in dollars per square feet per square foot were significantly higher than all of the other comps in there. And interestingly, leading with that bullet point made me immediately think it's end users who are driving this as much as the owners themselves. All right, I could imagine if I were in the market for some, to lease a building or buy a building, that would have immediate appeal to me. Of course, I'm in the industry and a bit of a techie anyway, but that just gives me the emotional justification I need to pay a little bit more, right? Look, it's a smart building. It's bound to be more efficient, better run, all those things. Lest we forget, that's how you close sales, right? It's through emotion. So that's kind of interesting that we're getting to the era where tenants are going to be more demanding of these kinds of things than just quote unquote the building owners. It actually goes one step further, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to build on that though, Tracy, and speaking from a property management perspective.
Yeah, you guys
property
know. Yeah.
Owner's perspective. And to answer your question a little bit, Jim, I think there's actually an opportunity window at the moment, and we touched on this before we actually started this whole session about the whole challenge with the return to office, and building owners are they are very worried about what the state of the play is, if leases are going to get renewed, are people going to come back to the office, what is the new model. There's a lot of opportunity that we see, for example, in being able to use data analysis, how are we changing the world as far as offices are going to happen. And I think right now, because of the fact that we've had technologies that are applicable in the space, adapting to that opportunity, I think, is one of those significant things that some folks can look at. And I think there is might not be a 10x, it might be more of a 5x or a 6x value proposition of, how do we actually use data to better, manage this whole crazy world that we live in at the moment, especially from occupancy.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer like it used to be.
So, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I actually wanted to pick up, Jim, on your previous comment about the 10 times value proposition, and tie it to what Anto had said earlier about the information side. That, I think if we characterize the future of our industry collectively across all the silos as we're in the building information business, right? Maybe come up with a different phrase, but basically that's what we're in that's the business we're in. And how that relates to the 10 times factor, I think of it in terms of the impact that Amazon had coming in selling books 20 years ago. And if all you thought was that they were interested in selling books, and you were, Barnes and Noble or Borders or whomever, you would be, you missed the picture that Bezos had in mind. He used used books as the way to prove the concept. And then what does he sell today? Everything. Okay. So our everything is every information system in the building. We're not going to do a private, we're not going to do a Steve Jobs thing. This group isn't. What we can do is influence, for hopefully, the thinking. And if we can get our industry collectively to think this way, that they need to get on board with cloud native and design each of their individual systems such they meet the criteria of that we're defining as cloud native, all of a sudden we're in the building information business as an industry. And that's going to change everything to the point that we're hoping it can and will. I'm convinced it will. So that's my contribution.
Great point. Thank you, Steve. I was going to key off of David's initial introduction where he talked about the documents and the buildings. And from my perspective, I've told most of you before that I don't do commercial real estate. I do one or two buildings. and I do institutional real estate and corporate real estate, higher education, government real estate. What I find interesting is that there's no reason for these long-term holders of a building, maybe hundreds of years, that they should have the same calculus that David mentioned. But what I find fascinating is they do. And I think that even though they're not trading the building and not thinking, they have no reason to think about the asset the way that David portrayed. But I find that maybe there's something wrong with the way that finance people are trained, that there is only one way to look at a problem.
I wish we were at a bar and I'd order you a shot right now, Jim. I'm in violent agreement with that. And I really, let me share an interesting anecdote. So I'm running a new software platform company for the real estate industry because I see all of these issues. And we just, gained a new investor and advisor and board member who was a senior managing partner at Hines. And he and I have been having lunch on a pretty regular basis for over a year now. And we have such a rich data exchange and we learn so much from each other. And in all of my smart digital building work, I was always looking for an owner like him to actually do all this stuff with, who got it and was interested in it and saw the advantages. And he saw the same thing in me and what I've been doing. And what's amazing is that Hines would come to the table, they'd agree to a sale price. Hines would gather all of their building documentation at this time, typically 3-ring binders and all the reports from all the systems, everything, totally dialed in, and they'd never get the price knocked down. And the buyer sitting across the table wouldn't even know what to do with the documentation presented to them about the asset. And this is where and why Hines was able to outperform the market, because they had better documentation, because they cared about the physical asset more. And the way I've been talking about it, and I'd love input on any of this, but it's taking house pride in the asset. It's being house proud and taking care of the building. And there just doesn't seem to be enough of that. But when a company cares about their headquarters and cares about the image it projects to the industry and how the building asset is actually part of their brand identity, these are really, really important things. And if you don't give a shit about indoor air quality, or you don't really care about proper light and having a fitness center or whatever amenities, it actually now is a reflection on the company or whomever the tenant is, and it's now becoming a reflection on the building owner. So
my point, and I'd love you to reflect on this for a minute, is maybe we found who we need to go disrupt, which is the financial people.
You're exactly correct. And that's why I was putting the why in this paper around the financial people, because historically, it's been, we've all been focused on the physical asset and the people who care about the physical asset, the data, and the operations, but it's the financial side we need to truly win over to cause this change to happen. And they know as little as you can imagine about the physical asset. They're looking at their syndication of their offering and different ways to avoid taxes. They're not concerned about interoperability, unfortunately.
So positioning this industry as building information, I know it doesn't solve that the financial question here, but does it help? Does it support that? And could it be that the trigger that enables the disruption that Jim was mentioning through that channel, through the finances.
In my opinion, it definitely would. But this is where, you know, the security of the data and the central challenge that I've been seeing is that if you look at standardized data about a physical asset, when you look at the data about the physical asset, the questions that a buyer should ask first is, you know, what's the warranty on the roof? It's wherever there's the biggest capital risk to their future revenue. And there's data about the physical asset that can certainly be done better, but then there's another level of data information about the building operations and monitoring and all of that. And I really feel like being on top of this and having a true digital development workflow is the answer to all of this. And included in that is the financial performance, the waterfalls, the revenue, the pro formas, and the lease up schedules that are central to that data as well. And this is why the owner needs both the physical asset information and the financial performance information together. And neither is standardized in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that's too bold of a statement. On the financial side, it's not. On the physical asset side, we do have things like uniformat, master format, and things like that, but we're not yet leveraging those as well as we can or should. And I think IFC outputs from all of those are going to be the gateway to making all of this happen.
So we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to start to wrap this. Anybody want to volunteer to summarize what we just spent the hour talking about? Any volunteers? Otherwise, I'll pick someone. I'm going to pick Roger because he.
Okay. I mean, to me, there is this, you know, both from what Rick was saying earlier and what David's saying, I mean, and crossing over with what Jim was saying about he needs his 10 times, I don't think it doesn't sound like there's going to be any one thing. It sounds like it could be a combination of a number of things that are going to drive this, you know, and lest we forget it, you know, don't forget about Generation Z and their demands and retention of staff, which are pressures that are going to be put on these guys as well. So I think it probably is going to be a combination. And we've been speaking about, you know, God knows how many things over the past year or so. And I think they're all kind of getting together as the perfect storm maybe to actually make this happen.
So does the building information industry part of it help that, you think, Roger?
Well, you got to manage all this somehow. And that's, you know, without management of that, it's useless, you know, and that's where you get the data from to actually ensure that your buildings are performing and are correct. You know, if it's no good just saying, okay, yeah, that's it, it's going. It's like the same as we have buildings today that gets put in, the consultant specifies it, and everybody walks away from it. It's a constant exercise. So that information, and there is no information until the building's occupied anyway. You know, it doesn't happen during the construction phase, it happens afterwards once it's occupied. So it's essential.
So maybe that is the 10x, or that, because from no information or from very little information to the type of information necessary for financial work, that's a very significant step.
Yep.
Right. That's going from non-mobile to mobile phone.
Yep.
Maybe.
Okay. The one thing I would chime in here too is focusing a lot on the why, and everything that we say and do is more important than the how.
Yeah.
We're going to lose if we've identified who we need to communicate this to and disrupt as a financial people. The why is much more critical than the how to them, I think. Yeah.
All right, let's wrap this. Thank you very much. Thanks, David, for your contribution. Thanks, everybody
Thank you,
else.
David. Really helpful.
This has been
Yeah,
a great
good job.
conversation.
Thanks, David. Always good to have you on.
Thank you, gentlemen. Always a pleasure.
All
Have a
right.
great rest of the day.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
There you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.